Hey, summer's heating up, and I'm just hoping it isn't a dumpster fire that's causing it. Wow, that's a hell of a way to start a video. And when 2023's been doing so good, too. I don't really have a reason to be cynical, so maybe I shouldn't go into this with that attitude. Anyway, you know the drill by now. New season of anime just dropped, and I had to pick shows. So I did just that. By submitting horribly skewed legal cases to the United States Supreme Court, whichever they decided to rule on were my winners. Hey, bonus points if it eroded democracy in the process. At least I got some winners out of it. Horimiya is back with some much needed side story content delivering the characters we love. Raiza no Atelier has a girl using alchemy to resurrect her dead. Oh, sorry, wrong show. Go on an adventure. Ayaka is another generic fantasy series that couldn't bother to distinguish itself. I feel like I've seen Uchi no Kaisha no Chisai Senpai no Hanashi before, but here's another in a growing list of small girls in a workplace anime. Isekai's refusal to die is past endearing at this point, and Jitsu Aore Saikyo Deshita is another in a long line. Well shit if I gotta deal with that. Maybe Mushoku Tensei Season 2 can cleanse my palate afterwards. Yumemiru Danshiwa Genjitsu Shigisha takes rom-com misunderstandings to the next level. Gohan's redemption arc officially begins with Tsukina Koga Megane wa Wasureta, where a guy likes a girl who'd forget her head if it wasn't attached. Chido Hanbaiki ni Umare Kawata takes reincarnated isekai to its extreme, and does absolutely nothing with it. Hey, we all need a happy ending sometimes, and Watashi no Shiawase Nakekon is pretty much just that as a story. Undead Girl Murder Farce has a detective solving monster murders. I'm not sure the Shonen Sphere is gonna even make it through this season, with Jujutsu Kaisen's long-awaited return. Oh, Rent-A-Girlfriend got a third season? No thanks. Dekiru Neko wa Kyomo Yutsu is what the future looks like if genetic engineering isn't stopped. I think Yu-Gi-Oh! And No Game No Life are gonna sue somebody, looking at Liar Liar. Bleach's final arc continues the hype shonen season. Zom 100 reminds us that the only way out of capitalism is a literal apocalypse. Dark Gathering is about a part-time ghost hunter who hates his job. And lastly, Elk shows us why there's so goddamn many demon lords in anime. I've got a hell of a roster this time around, so let's get on into it. First up is some Horimiya extra content. This was a killer slice of life romance anime that gave us some actual payoff in the romance department. So immediately it's worth watching, but it wasn't just the two leads I liked. The supporting characters are good too. Hell, their romances are just as compelling. And I was a little disappointed we didn't get to see much of them in the anime, so that begs the question, what are we getting here? Content that was in the manga, but not adapted into the anime, which makes this pretty hype. How does it deliver on that promise though? Honestly, pretty nice. This is a great companion to the main anime and picks up without missing a single beat. It frames it like they're reminiscing on past events after graduation, but really should be viewed as just more of the anime. The comedy is on point and packs in the fluff, giving anyone an excellent excuse to rewatch the old show along with this one. But I think what really impressed me is the fact that this could have been really half-assed, and Cloverworks chose not to. Even as a side story, it packs the same artistic drive the original series had, so it's a high quality product on top of being more of what I've come to love. So yeah, definitely check it out for more Horimiya. Game tie-in animes always seem to miss because they try to capture an audience adjacent, but can't really go too crazy with the storyline, or else it'll overshadow the thing that actually makes money. So really they just end up being a middling waste of time, and we're looking to see if Atelier Raiza fails to stand out as a result. We follow a girl who sets out on an adventure with some friends, meets an alchemist, and suddenly has a life goal of adventuring? Sure, why not? The first episode is an hour long, and that's honestly too long for what it accomplishes, though I guess it definitely captures the boredom the main character's feeling, with extended scenes about her avoiding farm work and listening to her dad talk about wheat. Oh, and walks through the forest. And more than that too, the characters are all fairly standard JRPG tropes with a bookish mage, reliable friendly muscle dude, and the decision maker main character who happens to be the eye candy for the audience. I wasn't really drawn in by the cast if you couldn't tell, and I'm choosing to ignore the fashion choices that scream JRPG protagonists. Really, what farmer's daughter wears this on a daily basis? Fuck off. Basically, this takes way too long to get any semblance of a story or motivation going, and by the time it does, it's wearing thin. The thing is, this is a tie-in to a 2019 JRPG title that's an entry into a larger game franchise, so, I don't know, maybe fans would be able to jump in easier, but coming from a casual perspective, I wasn't impressed. Liden Films is handling the adaptation here and it's fairly polished, though not technically impressive by any stretch. I know it probably sounds like I'm being hard on this because it wasn't super engaging, But you might be surprised to hear I think it's just a fairly middle-of-the-road entry this season. Fans of the game will surely love it, but for your average viewers, it's definitely a slow start to an adventure series. Keep that in mind. Alright, because Mysterious Island life is a thing this season, let's look at Ayaka, about some orphan kid who ends up returning to where he was born on some random island with magic and shit. The description for this really doesn't offer much besides island, the kid's dad has disciples, and that's about it. So we're going in blind here. That's not usually a great sign. If the thing meant to give people a reason to check out your original anime doesn't tell you anything about the plot besides the most vague of details. Oh, and look at that. The first episode backs up my worry quite a bit. Starting off mid-crisis with no context, sort of obnoxious editing, edgy loner kid with magic powers, and a mysterious stranger appearing in his life to whisk him away to his birthright. So, heavily reliant on tropes with little deviation, I see. On top of not strong characterization and everything just sort of happens without a clear reason for the audience to suspend disbelief or, I don't know, get invested in the story at all. These are the hallmarks of a really mediocre entry. What bothers me though is this is by the same director as Happy Sugar Life, Uramichi Onisan, and Renai Flops. Shows that all have strong direction and personality, and I'm just not feeling that here. Not that this is at all related to it, but I'm getting the same vibes I got from Shinobi no Itoki back in fall of 2022, where it seems like it's got good ideas, but is relying heavily on tropes and hand-waving away a lot of the more fantastical elements rather than exploring them. As for the art and animation, it's extremely plain. Like, there's zero effort into showing things artistically here, which left this visually bland on top of the dull story. It's competent, just not impressive. And I might be more forgiving if it wasn't an original anime, but because it is an original, it doesn't have a baked-in audience and tends to need to impress people with its first episode. Speaking of, since it's original, we'll see if it can turn things around. I mean, it has the talent behind it to do that, so we'll see. The first episode didn't leave a strong impression. No pun intended, but let's see if My Tiny Senpai can measure up to My Senpai is Annoying from 2021. Both have similar premises. Cute tiny adult women working in an office with a bigger dude, and romantic tensions flow from that. The issue is this dynamic doesn't really seem to work as well when it's reversed, probably because it comes off as a bit creepy, and unfortunately the first episode is fairly mediocre, and not because it's horribly flawed, just the fact that it jumps into the status quo without any sort of build-up or story arc for the audience to settle in with. Immediately we're hammered with this tiny office worker is unrealistically cute and sweet, and the main dude is simping for her super hard. The weird thing is their crush seems somewhat mutual. I can't really say why. The dude has zero personality, but it's not really noticed, so it's just a lot of flirting and blushing with no real substance behind it. That leaves this one feeling pretty damn hollow, because the cast are essentially non-existent props meant to convey cute, and that's entirely it. There isn't really characters behind these designs to get attached to, so if you're looking for something like Uzaki where the whole will they won't they game is kinda the point, or like how Futaba had a barely contained Napoleon complex driving some joke variety in My Senpai is Annoying, you're not getting that here. Now don't get me wrong, a deeper story and characters isn't necessary to be enjoyable, but unless you're really tapped for a cute girls anime, I can't really recommend picking this up, because others do that while managing a story and memorable cast. The art and animation is fine for what you would expect for this genre, with a strong emphasis on the cute, but it's not helping this series stand out more than it already is struggling to. If you're desperate for some mind-numbing fluff, this can serve that purpose, otherwise I'd probably skip it. And here I thought I might have escaped the isekai curse, but Am I Actually the Strongest had to go and ruin that for me. So, you've heard this setup before. A guy's reincarnated into a fantasy world with some absurd power, underestimated, and is actually the strongest in the world, which means he now has to go about proving himself one small inconsequential story arc at a time. We've seen these before, so there's barely anything of note to talk about. This dude's OP power this time is he can use barrier magic that stretches the definition of barrier to the goddamn limit, that way he can do pretty much anything he wants. But this kinda calls my street cred into question, because I don't really hate what I'm seeing. Now don't get me wrong, it's not good by any stretch. The reincarnation aspect is hand-waved away, the powers are nonsensical, and the world is bland as hell. But the series treats all this more as a comedy than anything else. It's just goofy enough that I'm sort of laughing at the stupidity. So, it's getting points for that. How's the art? Not great. It seems they're going with a more colorful, cartoonish style that complements the humor in this series, so I can appreciate that. But it's also fairly lazy in its shot choice and animation. I'll at least give it a few more episodes before I ultimately decide if it's one of those dumb enough it's enjoyable isekais, but even that bar is starting to get a little high these days, mostly due to the sheer amount of garbage isekais coming out. If you ignore the idiot ball-wearing sidekick meant to be mostly fan service, it could be worth a look. Well shit, here's the gold standard when it comes to reincarnated anime. Back with its second season finally. Jobless reincarnation doesn't really need an introduction at this point, but if you've ever seen an isekai at all, understand this is where isekai gets its tropes from. A loser otaku dies doing a good deed, was reborn, but actually has to come to terms with who he was as a person, and tries his damnedest to be a better person with his second chance at life. And the fact that he's OP was born through his own efforts, rather than some god-given talent. Last season ended with some hard-hitting feelings, with Rudius going through new levels of pain he couldn't experience in his previous life due to his lack of close connections, which is where this season picks up, him gathering the pieces of his life and fix some of this mess as best he can. The first episode picks up with his close friend, as we see how Sylphie has been getting by since the teleportation incident that destroyed their home. And it feels like the more the story goes on, the more invested I become in these characters. Hell, Sylphie's a girl we haven't seen much of for most of this series to this point, and the fact that we can immediately connect with her is a mark of good writing. The art and animation are on par with the previous season, though lacking some of the jaw-dropping moments it had in episode 1, but it still packs a strong visual style, expressive animation, and an artistic edge that conveys a ton of how the cast is feeling, especially in this first episode considering how fragile Sylphie's mental state is. If you're not caught up, do so, because this series seems to only improve as it goes on, and that's really saying something considering the start it had. Next up, we have The Dreaming Boy a Realist, where a creepy stalker type dude has some post-nut clarity and realizes the girl he's been obsessing over is probably out of his league and decides to back off, basically flipping the situation because now she's wondering why the guy who was all over her suddenly is keeping his distance. Did you think we were skimping on the rom-coms this season? Because the answer's no. So as this picks up, it immediately establishes how obnoxious this dude is, and I think that's actually pretty important for the core premise, because it needs to show us why this change is not just noticeable, but it helps it's for the better. Though, let's just get this out in the open now. How flippantly it treats some of this subject matter is pretty gross, to be honest. The humor here is kind of lacking too, as it really hammers on the one joke that this dude's not flirting like he normally does. And oh, now she's jealous because this suddenly turned into a love triangle. Great subversion of the norm you set up and then quickly obliterated within the first minute of the show. On top of that, it's glacially paced, with only a few scattered throughout the entire episode. Which, that means the romance should be good, right? No. The cast has no chemistry because she's stuck up, and he's a loser. Well then maybe at least it's visually engaging, right? Wrong. The art's really bad. The series has some incredibly low-detailed scenes, some pretty distracting CG, and sort of mixes a cutesy slice-of-life aesthetic with borderline low-res visual novel graphics. Yeah, safe to say, this isn't doing the anime any favors. The premise is the strongest thing about this series, so I guess it's worth sticking out a bit to see if it improves, but I'm not exactly holding my breath. Let's see if the Gohan's redemption arc is worth the hype and the girl I like forgot her glasses. A guy notices his one cute classmate he's crushing on always seems to forget her glasses, and he has to help her out, which obviously leads to a friendship and eventual romance. That's how it goes in anime. Straightforward and to the point. I like it, but since this isn't a deep lore sort of series, it'll live and die on its characters. So how does it do on that front? Well, actually pretty good. It shows this guy's feelings to this girl visually, like with just him fantasizing about spending more time with her, and that's some solid marks for showing what a crush is like. Just wanting to spend time with the person you like, you know? And seeing these two start from square one is an innocent sort of relationship that's heartwarming to watch unfold, because it captures the awkward and preciousness of a first love so damn effectively. The girl's got some serious ditz energy that makes her a perfect little moe blob, with an overly courteous guy to cover up for her mistakes. And yeah, that's a dynamic that's been done to death, but personally I've yet to grow tired of it. It kinda helps how oblivious she is and also how shy the guy is around her. So yeah, the studio's really gotten a bad rap for their horribly animated action series, so maybe the slower paced slice of life stuff will land better. It's going back to their roots, honestly. This still does have its moments that scream, yeah, this is a Gohan's anime. But it's also not exactly horrible. Hell, some of those work decently well for the love story theme this series is going for. Like damn, the first few minutes are pretty fire, and the artistic transitions reinforce the characters' feelings to boot. Perhaps they just found their true calling. For a sweeter romance story without a lot of unnecessary baggage, this is definitely worth picking up. Alright, I give up. I'm just not escaping isekai. I'm reborn as a vending machine, now I wander the dungeon has been on my radar for some time due to its out there premise. A guy gets crushed by a vending machine and I guess that tickled some god's fancy, because he's been reincarnated as a vending machine, of all things. But some girl he happens upon notices he's intelligent and decides to take him on a road trip to towns and dungeons, where he starts impacting the world economy. Now that it's finally gotten an anime adaptation, how does it fare? Well, kinda tame for its premise to be honest, but I will say I at least appreciate how it operates, since being a vending machine has a ton more limitations on his body than, for instance, remember Reincarnated as a Sword, where the dude being an inanimate object barely impacted him in that one? Here the dude has limited speech and can't move, and it genuinely feels like an obstacle in the story that needs to be overcome. So, I like it in theory at least. In practice, it's a bit of a departure from standard isekai with OP protagonists and such, as this takes a more casual slice of life pace, since the dude's literally a vending machine who needs money to survive. Is it high art? Definitely not, but it's at least a fairly relaxing bit of junk food that kept me entertained. As for the art direction, it's definitely the worst to talk about, because it's polished and plain like pretty much most anime on the market these days. So, it's invisible, which is probably for the best here. If you're going into this with low expectations, you'll find a decent, slower paced isekai, and I'm kinda feeling that. Oh wait, if you're here, that means we're already halfway through our roster. Time for an obligatory ad break. Or maybe not if you're using an ad blocker or just got lucky. Anyway, back to more of our first look then. I feel like most of this season has been fairly bland, and I'd like to venture into some actual romance anime without all the attempts at jokes. So let's look at My Happy Marriage next. A girl is born into a family of psychics but lacks any power herself and ends up being treated poorly as a result. Her life has been pretty garbage, and when it's announced she'll be marrying a guy who has a reputation as a jerk, she's expecting it to continue on just like that. That is until she's pleasantly surprised that he's a nice guy and takes care of her. So, now she's living a happy life. Maybe I'm just tired of all the cynicism in media these days, that an anime about a genuinely happy marriage sounds appealing. So looking at the first episode itself, the situation is much like a Cinderella story, with an abusive stepmother and half-sister beating the main girl into submission to the point that she's essentially dead inside. Yeah, immediately you feel for her, and seeing the smallest bright patches in her life are what make her someone to root for, and also hurt when those are stamped out. The first episode does an excellent job at getting you to identify with the cast, so I'm pleased. The animation is sharp and detailed, using some artistic flares to really convey the story in a visual way. It looks nice, but doesn't have any stylistic choices, which could kinda work here. It's not gonna turn anyone off. If you're looking for a romance story, this is a solid one to check out, because it's not just fluffy, but really creates a strong emotional investment with the audience. Hell, we're on a bit of a roll here, so let's see if Undead Girl Murder Farce can deliver. At the end of the 19th century, where monsters are practically hunted to extinction, a vampire is almost murdered and tries to solve her own case, using a maid to carry around her severed head in a birdcage. There she enlists the help of a half-oni who fights monsters in a carnival, since he's the only one who can actually kill her for realsies. Well, that's certainly an out there premise. But what's this thing actually like? Honestly, the farce in the show's title gives it away. It's a sort of over-the-top dramatic series that takes itself entirely too seriously, while also sort of aware of how goofy it really is. And who did they enlist to keep that tone in order? The director of Kaguya-sama, so you know he's got a talent for that style. It's off to an interesting start in the first episode, laying out the mystery, exploring the world, and handing us some characterization that'll give this some staying power. There's not too much out this season that's as comfortable in its own skin as this anime is, and I'm definitely enjoying what we got. A bit of action, a bit of mystery, but also a commitment to being over the top in those aspects. This show's look is kind of a strange mix. It's not bad, and the actual animation is perfectly fine. I'll even say, parts are well done. The art style fits the sort of story they're going with as well, though it's also not particularly impressive. The character designs are good, but how they're drawn feels sort of lazy, like it was passed off to interns to do the actual line work. And I mean, it has the same studio that did Sarazanmai, and that had fantastic visuals and animation, so I know they can do better than this, which is probably why I'm being so harsh. Either way, this is a fun show that's worth a look. Well, Season 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen is here. That's probably all I really need to say, honestly. Really, what else is there to even add? The first outing was a visual spectacle by MAPPA for a fairly straightforward storyline that didn't really find its footing until the end of the first core. From there it goes off the rails, with exploring the setting, monsters, and powers, which is where I think Jujutsu Kaisen shines as a franchise. Since the series' introductions are all out of the way at this point, Season 2 is sure to be a romp. So how does it handle that return? With a big bang, by jumping into Gojo's past. Why is that important? Because it basically informs the main plot of the story, so we're getting the background on not just him, but a lot of characters by proxy, so it's definitely looking to be a strong return. The animation is about on par with last season as well, so expect some great fight scenes, if you're into that sort of thing. If you're somehow not caught up, now would be the time, so definitely worth a look. I wasn't really joking about the whole Gohan's redemption arc, because they're also handling the masterful cat is depressed again today. So an office worker takes a cat into her house, but rather than it just being a fluff ball full of moe, this thing essentially turns into her stay-at-home house husband. Literally towers over her, cooks, cleans, shops, and keeps her life in order. Well, that's crazy. So we're dealing with a comedy with an out there premise. I think what strikes me the most is just how not like a comedy this feels. Probably because the studio typically does action shows and seems to be approaching it with that sort of pacing in mind. I don't know if that's good or bad just yet, but it's certainly unique. As for the humor, it flows well and has some solid comedic timing. The cat doesn't actually talk either, so it's just a giant cat that takes care of this woman. And yeah, that's the main source of comedy, but how it approaches that varies enough that it doesn't really feel like it's retelling the same joke over and over. This one still has that Gohan's touch with some really jarring CG, but like I said with the girl who forgot her glasses, I think their visual quirks work a lot better here than they do in their action series. Why? Because it's giving sweeping views and complex scenes to daily life where a lot of moving parts come together. Is it as emotionally impactful though? Not really, but it's also not ruining my immersion. Overall, this one feels like a fever dream in all the right ways, and I'm enjoying it quite a bit because of just how refreshingly different it is. If you're looking for a comedy unlike anything else out this season, check this out. Next, we're looking at Liar Liar. On some academy island where people are way too obsessed with games, there's a ranking system where kids basically decide the pecking order on who's best. Our main dude beat the best gamer girl by chance, and is now the top ranked gamer on campus. Yeah, too bad he's not nearly good enough to back it up though, so now he's doing the whole fake it until you make it thing for real. It really sums up the core premise within the first minute or so, and right after makes it abundantly clear this dude is bluffing really hard. So if you're expecting some mastermind who's 2 steps ahead sort of anime, this ain't it. And honestly, the first episode plays out like a pitch or a tutorial for some garbage MMO, and that's kinda funny in a way, but ultimately the series can at least get a chuckle out of me when it's trying to, so it's got points there. The main draw is seeing the guy bumble his way through complex situations, piss people off because he doesn't know a damn thing, and turn the world on its head as a result. And this is entertaining for what it is. The style for this one's kind of all over the place and mostly cohesive. It uses lighter, sometimes abstract colors that don't really dip into blacks or whites, often creating a smooth and artistic look, despite the actual art not being too impressive. It's also not afraid to use deformed models for jokes, so there's that. If you're looking for a comedy with a pretty dumb premise that actually delivers on the laughs, this could be worth a look. Oh, Bleach is back for the second of its 4 split cores. About damn time. I don't really know what else to say about this either because Bleach is a staple in the shonen battle genre, and with its return last year, it basically reminded people why this franchise was so damn popular in the late aughts. We're at the capstone of the entire series, so jumping in now is probably asking a bit much, so let's just look at how the first episode stands up to the hype. Well, after learning about Ichigo's parents' past, seeing the Soul Society get absolutely wrecked, it's time to prepare for the next wave of fighting as the 1000-year blood war continues. We finally see some hints of the villain's backstory too, and that'll get a bit deeper as the story goes on. From this point, the series gets crazy, as this is the part where people were saying stuff happens in the manga. The animation is about on point with what it was last core as well, maintaining that sharp and stylistic edge it had while still looking like Bleach. If you're a fan of Bleach, this is a must-watch. That's a no-brainer. Let's stick with the undead theme for a bit and look at Zom 100. A guy is suffering from some serious burnout at work and binges zombie movies in his precious downtime. Life sucks and he can't even confess his feelings to his coworker he's got a crush on. But one morning he wakes up and finds his fantasies have come true, with an actual zombie apocalypse throwing his old life out the window. That's just what the doctor ordered because now he's having a blast. Combining every dude's dream with comedy and horror, we're dealing with a show that has a good blend of genres allowing for some engaging content. The first episode here nails some key things early on. This dude's life sucks. Juxtaposed with his flashback, we see it's literally worn him down. We also see why he could survive in an apocalypse and why this might actually be a lifesaver for him. It's got solid comedic timing, mixing some into its chase scenes and such, showing a real understanding of how to get laughs in its setting. But I think what surprises me the most is the amount of heart here. Like, you really get into this dude's headspace and it's pretty damn dark. But that's actually a positive of this series, as it's a mark of good writing. This is Bug Film's first outing with this anime. We're seeing some serious promise here as they're showing a lot of ambition, solid action with fluid animation, and a style that takes a ton of inspiration from horror classics. But I like how it visually shows the slow slide into depression that this dude faces, as the color from his world saps away and everything gets darker. Then how it snaps into abstract colors as soon as the zombies appear makes it feel so detached from reality, like it might be a mental breakdown on his part, so it's kinda cool. Are you looking for an action or horror series that's a bit more thoughtful than you're used to? This is definitely worth checking out. And since we're already looking at horror, let's stick around with Dark Gathering, as it's about a guy who can see ghosts, hates his gift as it's gotten people hurt, and ends up distancing himself from others. That is until his childhood friend ropes him into tutoring her little cousin. But as it turns out, that kid can see ghosts too and wants to seek them out so she can find the one who killed her parents. Yeah, now he's stuck chaperoning her and confronting all the stuff he tried to hide from. This is a lot more of a straightforward horror series, as his tutoring sessions for her turn into exorcisms a lot more often than not. And while it's not as bloody, it certainly goes a lot harder into the horror than our last entry did. That's honestly a bit refreshing. Now, horror is entirely subjective, and I will say this didn't scare or disturb me, but it definitely left an impression, probably because of how serious it takes the darker aspects of its story, informing why the kid wants revenge on ghosts and seeks them out. The art and animation for this series certainly feel like a throwback, with character designs reminiscent of 90s anime, getting a lot of shoujo vibes from it honestly. And that especially comes across with the flatter, sort of muted color palette. Honestly, it kinda stands out due to just how unremarkable it is. Almost like it's quaint by today's standards, you know? So does this style actually work? Well, that's tricky. If you're nostalgic for the aesthetic, you'll probably dig it. But if you're not, it'll probably feel like a lower budget franchise, which it really isn't, considering the models are well done and the art is crisp. I'm always a sucker for horror anime, and this one's off to a good start, so I'll say check it out if you're into these sort of shows. Last up, we have Hulk. After a hero kills the Demon King and humanity rejoices, the demon world is the polar opposite. They're gearing up for a tournament to decide who the next Demon King is. And hey, it's actually going pretty smooth. Well, except for one problem. The favored one to win? Yeah, it's a human hero who killed the Demon Lord already. So it's up to one of the most powerful administrative demons to figure out what the hero is actually after. So the whole hero turning on humanity isn't exactly a new trope, but this is a fairly refreshing take, since the main character doesn't really seem to be said hero, more that the story is about him. I also like that it doesn't fit the young kid skinny protag with crazy hair mold that Japan has been drunk on for most of its history. We're looking at him from a demon's lens this time, and the premise feels a bit like a comedy of errors, though it's effective and gives it a bit of humor too. So yeah, it's competent in its pitch. How it handles the situation where only one demon seems the problem with this, and the rest are just kind of won over by him, gives this some character I like. Add onto that a bit of mystery about Hulk's true motives, and it makes this a fun and interesting first episode, especially when the climax introduces a new threat. The art for this is a bit more on the cartoony side, but I think it works well for this series, mostly because it has this Herculean-inspired sort of hero with a friendly personality, while allowing for the more absurd moments to breathe. The art and animation aren't the most complex, but it also doesn't look bad and it fits with the story's theme, so I'm feeling it. If you're looking for a bit more fun of an adventure series this season, I'd say it's worth a look. So that's it. Summer 2023 certainly has a few shows that are worth keeping an eye on. Though don't get me wrong, there's some serious mediocrity in this first crop, but ultimately there's some upsets, underdogs, and even some clear winners I'm looking forward to. But tell me your thoughts down below. What shows are you the most excited about this season? I'd love to hear them. For now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to HonorWolf01, RobinDBL, Samuel Chen, and Shriken for their continued support. Thanks for watching.